Since I was a child, my life was shaped by the teachings of Islam. I grew up in a devout family where faith was not just a tradition, but the very essence of our existence. The call to prayer echoed 5 times a day, and each of these prayers was a constant reminder of our submission to Allah. The mosque was my refuge, a place of peace and learning where I sought guidance and strength for my soul. I was proud of my devotion and firmly believed that my path was straight, paved by faith and obedience to God's commandments. My life revolved around the Quran and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. I studied the hadiths, memorized surahs, and constantly debated about religion with those I met. I was confident that my faith was the purest and truest. I always respected other beliefs, but to me, Christianity was full of flaws. The idea of the Trinity seemed absurd, and the belief in salvation by grace sounded like a shortcut for those unwilling to put in the effort. Jesus was a prophet, yes, but nothing more. I rejected any notion that he could be divine. Over the years, I was challenged by Christians who tried to explain their beliefs to me. I responded with solid arguments, always citing the Quran and dismantling what I saw as inconsistencies in the Bible. Each debate reinforced my conviction that I was on the right path. But deep down, there were small doubts that never completely disappeared. They were thoughts that emerged in the silent early mornings when the world slept and it was just me and my inquietudes. I wondered if my good deeds would truly be enough. The Quran teaches that on the day of judgment, our actions will be weighed, and our eternal fate will depend on that balance. But what if no matter how hard I tried, my sins outweighed my good deeds? That thought haunted me, even as I tried to bury it with more study and prayer. Everything changed on a day that began like any other. I woke up for the Fajr prayer, followed my usual routine, and spent the day with my family. But in the afternoon, I felt a strange discomfort in my chest. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was something fleeting. However, the pain intensified quickly. When night came, it became unbearable. My brother, alarmed, insisted that we go to the hospital. I hesitated, but deep down I knew something was wrong. As soon as we arrived at the emergency room, the doctors examined me and quickly hooked me up to machines. The diagnosis came as a shock. I was having a severe heart attack. It made no sense. I was young, healthy, followed a balanced diet, and exercised regularly. How could this be happening to me? Panic overwhelmed me as I realized the seriousness of the situation. Death was no longer a distant concept. It was right before me. My mind raced, replaying my life in flashes. I thought of my family, of everything I had yet to do, of the prayers I had yet to perform. I closed my eyes and murmured the Shahada, clinging to the faith that had always guided me. If this was my end, I wanted to depart in total submission to Allah. Then everything changed. The pain suddenly disappeared. The sounds of the doctors and machines became a distant noise. I opened my eyes, but I was no longer in the hospital. To my surprise, I saw myself lying in the bed, but I was no longer inside my body. I was floating above the scene, observing everything with a strange sense of calm. My brother was beside the bed, holding my hand tightly, his face pale with worry. Doctors were running back and forth, trying to stabilize my condition, but I was no longer a part of that world. It was at that moment that I realized something even more astonishing. A light began to emerge in the distance. It was not an ordinary light. It pulsed, radiating a warmth that was not only physical, but also spiritual. There was something alive in it, something that called to me in an irresistible way. I tried to resist, for everything inside me said that I should remain in the world I knew, but the attraction was too strong. I was pulled toward the light, unable to control the movement. As I approached, the peace I felt intensified. All fear, doubt, or worry vanished. That light was not just light. It was presence. It was love. It was something infinitely greater than I. And then I saw a figure emerging in the glow. At first, it was difficult to understand what I was seeing, but as he drew nearer, I felt a wave of love and compassion that completely enveloped me. His eyes met mine, and in that gaze I saw something I had never experienced before, a profound knowledge of who I was. He saw every thought, every mistake, every doubt I had carried throughout my life. But instead of judgment, I received pure and absolute love. I am Jesus. The words echoed inside me like a silent thunderclap. My mind struggled to accept what it was hearing. Jesus? How was that possible? He was just a prophet, wasn't he? I had spent my life rejecting any idea of his divinity. But there he was, standing before me, more real than anything I had ever experienced. I tried to speak, but my voice failed. My thoughts raced in every direction, trying to rationalize what was happening. But before I could say anything, everything around me began to change. I saw scenes passing before my eyes as if I were being transported to another time and place. I saw Jesus healing the sick, restoring sight to the blind, and even raising the dead. I knew these stories from the Quran, but now I saw them with my own eyes. The power he carried was not human, it was something much greater. Then the scenes changed again. I saw Jesus at the Last Supper, speaking with his disciples. I saw his anguish as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then I saw the cross, the pain, the suffering, the nails, the crown of thorns, all so vivid that it was impossible to ignore. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Something in that scene carried a weight I couldn't fully comprehend. "Why did you do this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "For you," he replied. The words pierced my soul. My entire life, I had believed that salvation came through good deeds, through a continuous effort to balance the scale between sins and virtues. But there was Jesus, telling me that he had sacrificed himself for me, not so that I could earn salvation, but so that I could receive it as a gift. My heart was in conflict. Everything I believed was being challenged. How could I accept something like this? How could I admit that I had been wrong all along? Jesus looked at me with patience and love. "There is so much more I need to show you." The light around us began to change once again. The light around us intensified, and suddenly I was transported to a new place. What I saw took my breath away. Before me stretched a kingdom of indescribable beauty. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had ever seen, and the air seemed to pulsate with life. There was a deep peace, a harmony that transcended any explanation. In that moment, I knew I was in heaven. I saw people walking freely, their faces illuminated by an inexplicable joy. They laughed, embraced, sharing a happiness that came from within. None of them carried fear, pain, or suffering. Each one seemed completely content, as if they were whole in a way I had never seen in the world. Jesus was by my side, observing the scene with a tender look. "This is what God desires for everyone," he said softly, "an eternal communion with him, where there is no more pain, only infinite love." My mind tried to process it all. Was this paradise? Is this what is reserved for those who follow God? If so, then why had I never understood this truth before? "But what about those who do not come here?" I asked, shivering at my own question. Jesus' face grew sorrowful. "Come, there is something else I need to show you." Suddenly the light around us began to dissipate. The warmth and peace that had once filled my being were replaced by a cutting cold. The air became dense, heavy, laden with a sadness that seemed alive. Then I saw what I had never wished to see. It was a place of shadows, an abyss of endless darkness. At first I couldn't discern much, but then I realized there were people there. Their expressions were of pure despair. Their voices were moans of anguish. They did not cry out merely in pain, but for something far worse, the absence of any hope. My heart tightened. I wanted to look at Jesus, to beg that this was a mistake, that this couldn't be real. But deep down, I knew the truth. "Hell is not a punishment imposed by God," Jesus said, his voice laden with sorrow. "It is the consequence of separation from Him." These souls rejected God's love, refused the path of salvation, and now live in the emptiness of that choice. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say it was unfair. But looking at the souls around me, I understood something I had never comprehended before. It was not God who put them there. They had chosen to be there. Jesus looked at me, and I saw in his eyes a love so immense it was almost unbearable. "I gave my life so that no one would have to experience this," he said. "But true love cannot be forced. It must be accepted with an open heart." Tears streamed down my face. My heart was heavy with a pain that was not mine, but that I shared. For the first time, I understood the depth of what Jesus had done. His death on the cross was not just a sacrifice, it was an act of absolute love. He took upon himself the consequence of our sins so that no one would have to suffer that eternal separation. Then he looked into my eyes. "Do you understand now, Ahmed?" I nodded. For the first time in my life, I understood what grace meant. But there is something else I need to tell you. The world around us began to transform again. The light returned, and with it, the comforting warmth. I was back in the place of peace, but unlike before, I felt a weight on my heart. "You need to go back." Jesus' words hit me like a blow. "Go back?" I asked, confused. "But I don't want to go back. I want to stay here with you." He smiled patiently. "It is not your time yet. You need to share what you have seen." My mind struggled against it. How could I go back? How could I leave behind the glory I had experienced? How could I carry that burden alone? "You won't be alone," Jesus said. "I will be with you always." The light around me began to dissolve, and I felt a tug, as if I were being pulled back into my body. I fought against it, but I knew it was inevitable. And then I opened my eyes. The fluorescent lights of the hospital replaced the divine glow. My chest ached intensely, and the sound of the machines filled the room. I saw familiar faces around me, my family, doctors, nurses. My brother was holding my hand, his eyes wide with surprise and relief. "He's back!" someone exclaimed. My brother leaned closer. "Ahmed, can you hear me?" I tried to respond, but my mind was still elsewhere. What I had experienced was not a dream. It was not an illusion. It was the deepest truth I had ever known. In the following days, as I recovered, a struggle began within me. How could I share what I had seen? How could I tell my family that everything we believed in was not the complete story? I spent sleepless nights reliving every detail of my encounter with Jesus. Every word of his echoed in my mind. And then, a certainty grew within me. I needed to tell the truth. I started with my brother. I waited until we were alone and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something," I began. He looked at me with concern. "What is it, Ahmed?" I swallowed hard. How could I put into words something so grand? But then I remembered Jesus' promise. He would be with me. I told him everything, every detail. At first, my brother just listened without expressing any reaction, but as I spoke, I saw incredulity growing in his eyes. "This can't be true," he murmured, shaking his head. "I know it's hard to accept," I replied, "but it happened and now I cannot ignore it." He remained silent for a long time. Then finally he said, "I need to think about it." In the following days, I shared my story with a few more people. Some immediately rejected it. Others listened but remained skeptical. Yet some began to question. Some began to search for themselves. My life was never the same again. I was rejected by some, embraced by others. But above all, I was strengthened by one certainty. I had found the truth, and that truth could not be hidden. I knew that my journey was only just beginning. Sharing the truth about Jesus would not be easy, but now I understood the true meaning of grace. Salvation was not something I could earn through good deeds, but a gift offered out of love. Even in the face of rejection, I moved forward, knowing that Jesus was with me. Every soul touched, every heart open to the truth, made the challenge worthwhile. If my story could lead someone to find the same light that I had found, then every sacrifice would be worth it. And so, I continued to share the truth.